All right. So with physical evidence, okay, remember we were discussing Edmund Lockhart's exchange principle, okay, that with contact between two items, there will be an exchange. And the first form of physical evidence that we had was paint, okay? And I'm not spending a lot of time on this today because we'll have a review on this material next week prior to your test, okay? So just touching on the few main points. So one of the things we identified with paint specifically was its class, okay? So we're trying to identify the source of the paint. What was the object that was painted? Was it a car, a house, your fingernails, okay, what have you? We also talked about individual characteristics, and those are the things that we can use to indicate things like class or perhaps the source of that painted object. So, some of the individual characteristics for paint were the color of the paint, how many layers are painted. So, the number of layers, the chemical composition, or that physical match between two specific pieces of evidence, two of those paint chips. Okay, same thing with glass. We identified those individual characteristics that make it unique. Okay, so we were talking about things like the color of the glass, the tint, the thickness, the chemical composition, and its refractive index. So, how much sunlight is able to be absorbed and how much sunlight is reflected. Okay, whenever we talked about explosives, um, those are first thing we try to do is examine those to determine their chemical composition, which would identify the type of explosive that it was. All right, so with this example, we've got pipe bombs and chemical reaction bombs, which have two completely different chemical compositions. And the traces of those bombs, so the ingredients, are forms of physical evidence. They can be left behind on your skin, they can get in your hair, on your clothes, or even other objects associated with that bomb. So the main thing we're trying to do is link suspect to crime scene or link evidence to suspect, vice versa. And lastly, on Tuesday, we discussed what ballistics are. Okay, that's just a term for ammunition, firearms, bullets, those types of things. Um, Specifically, we defined what GSR stood for, which stands for gunshot residue. Okay, that's that vaporized gunpowder. We also identified what rifling was on the inside of the gun barrel. It's those grooves, okay, that are created when that barrel is bored out. So as the bullet travels down the barrel, it's going to be rotating because of the rifling on the inside. And as it travels down that barrel, it's taking on those grooves, okay? So the bullet is actually getting scratched, and that's what you see here in this example. These pictures, these lines that are in this bullet are marks from the rifling on the inside of that gun barrel. We identified IBIS, okay? IBIS, the Integrated Ballistics Identification System. So that's that database that houses many thousands of samples of evidence collected from specific crimes. Some have been solved and some are yet to be solved. Okay, and we also defined what caliber meant. Okay, that's for handguns and rifles very specifically, and that just refers to the internal diameter of the gun barrel. And the same thing for gauge. Okay, gauge is referring to shotguns very specifically. So 12 gauge, 20 gauge, that's just referring to the internal diameter of the shotgun's barrel. Okay, so this brings us to new notes. So the next form of physical evidence that we're going to be looking at is dust and dirt. And you're probably wondering, why are we talking about dust and dirt? Okay, that's not really a form of evidence. It's everywhere. But it as well can reveal individual characteristics that make it unique. Okay, so the main thing is that dust and dirt can reveal where a person has traveled. Okay, it can tell us where they've been. Just like Lockhart's exchange principle states, with contact between two items, there will be an exchange. So in this circumstance, your foot is walking through the dirt, okay? Your shoes are going to then take on some of that dirt. And when you leave that scene, okay, that area, you take that stuff with you, either in small amounts or big amounts. And you take it on down the hall, or take it, you track stuff in from the yard into the house. So that's his exchange principle. So the investigators have to look at the dirt, okay, and they try to examine the chemical composition of it, okay? So what are the elements in that dirt that make it unique, that make it stand out? And those things are the chemicals in the soil, okay? Things like pollen and plant material. So here's an example. So here in the South, okay, we all live in the South. So there are certain trees and bushes and things that grow down here that don't grow up north or in other parts of the world, for that matter. Okay, but talking about the United States, there's trees and things that grow in the South that don't grow up north. So one example would be the magnolia tree. So if there was pollen from a magnolia tree and a sample of dirt evidence, then we would know that that either had to been collected in the South, that the suspect lives in the South, the victim lives in the South. Somebody has some kind of connections here in the South, okay? And yes, that's still kind of a broad assumption, but it still narrows it down, okay? It narrows down our playing field. Somebody wanted to ask a question. That's perfectly fine. Go right ahead. Or tell me something about it. Go ahead.
Sometimes if it's like maybe mud, they might like trip on the lawn, like come inside, but then they might touch the wall before even doing the crime scene. The
You
person
got
that's the killer.
you're exactly right. Okay. So the mud that they track through, okay, it's all over their shoes, probably their clothes. And if they fell in it, like you said, then it's going to be other places. Then you come inside, put your hand on the wall, smear it down. Okay, well then, yeah, right there is just another good example of how that evidence can go from place to place. Okay, so then we're going to talk about fingerprints, and fingerprints are obviously one of the better known forms of evidence, okay? But you can't always see them. And on some surfaces you can see them, okay? But others you can't. So like my coffee cup, I can't see my fingerprints on it. But if I took my finger and put it on the glass screen of my cell phone, okay, and then you can't see it, okay? But I can see it pretty well. So some surfaces take on fingerprints good, and then some don't. There are three types of fingerprint patterns, okay? Three main types. And those are arches, loops, and whorls. Okay, so whenever we get into the fingerprint unit, we'll get into more of this. And if you were all here at school with me, then we would probably do a little activity where I come around with my ink pad and you choose which hand you want to, make your print of. And I would give you the ink, and you would literally just roll out your fingerprint onto this little worksheet that I have. And then you would try to identify what category of fingerprint you are. And each finger could be something different. They're not all going to be arches, loops, or whorls. Your pointer finger could be an arch, and your middle finger could be a loop, and your pinky could be a whorl. Okay, so it's all different. But you are the only person in the entire world that has the same fingerprints. Okay, so no other person in the world has the same exact fingerprints that you do, which is just another characteristic that's very individual and unique. Okay.
And sometimes they need some kind of special light to see the fingerprints.
You're absolutely right. You sure do. And there's also, so the typical method for lifting the fingerprints is to dust them. Okay. So there's actually a video at the end of class today that's what we're going to end on, as I'm going to show that video. But a lot of the times they used dust. Okay. And they have a very special brush that they use to introduce dust to the fingerprint. So the dust sticks to the oils or the sweat in your hands or on your fingerprint, and we can take a piece of tape or take picture, whatever we got to do to actually lift that off. And as Raiden said, yeah, sometimes it's easy to lift them off, and sometimes it's not. Okay, and if they're really good, sometimes we can just simply take a picture of it. So it just depends on the quality. But whenever we do find a fingerprint, we first thing we're going to do is once we dust it and lift it, we're going to take that sample and run it through AFIS. Okay, and AFIS is the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, which is just a database that's used by the FBI and people at local levels. So here in the city of Sims, on the state level, so the state of Alabama, or on the national level. Okay, so you have cities and towns and states, but in the whole entire country, whenever this evidence is submitted to it, this is the database that it's stored in. So you can imagine the many thousands of fingerprints that are on file on AFIS. Probably dating back to the 20s. Okay, so probably 100 years worth of fingerprints. And whenever you're arrested and booked, okay, that's one of the first things that they do is they take your fingerprints, because that's one of the things they're going to do is run it through AFIS and see if they can tie you to any other crimes that may have not been solved yet. Okay, so some of these cold cases. Somebody has a question. What happens if they don't find anyone whose fingerprint matches? So if we don't find a match to the fingerprint, then a lot of the times that would reveal that whoever the suspect is in this case isn't actually the person we're looking for. So it could potentially kind of discharge the suspect. So that would be a good thing, especially if you didn't commit that crime. So sometimes those things aren't solved. Okay, and we never figure out whose fingerprint it is, but that's why it's stored into AFIS. So say that 25 years down the road, that person gets arrested for DUI, they are going to be booked and they're going to be fingerprinted. So when they put that into AFIS, we have a match. Okay, so now not only are you being charged with a DUI, now we're going to tie you back to that case that was 25 years ago.
And
Okay.
TJ Simpson said, if you have gloves on, can they see your fingerprints?
It just depends on the type of glove. Okay, so if it's a very thin latex glove, yes, your fingerprints actually can go through that. Okay, but if you're wearing thick, lawn like yard working gloves or leather gloves, then no, those keep you safe and keep your fingerprints undisclosed. All right. So let me type in the chat what I want you to have note-wise for dust and dirt and fingerprints. And please remember that I'm stressing the fact that you take notes, okay? So I'm your teacher. I know what's on the test. I create the test. So if I tell you to write something down, it's probably a good indication that it will be on your test, right? So first thing is, how could dust or dirt be used in an investigation? All right, so think about it. I want one of y'all to answer that for me while I get ready to type what I want you to have for fingerprints. Somebody can type it in the chat, or you can just unmute yourselves and speak through. Tell me, how could dust or dirt be used in an investigation? In other words, what does dust and dirt tell us?
It could be used to find your footprint.
Okay, it could. It could be used to find a footprint. So that dust and dirt sticks to your shoe, so you leave a very good shoe impression behind on certain floors. Okay, but what else could it tell us? Okay, what's the main thing that it's going to tell us? Dust and dirt. I think y'all are overthinking it. Read the note on the slide, not in the chat.
It can tell how long. It can tell how long they traveled.
Okay, it might not tell us exactly how long they traveled.
How a person has traveled.
Very, very good. Okay, you hit the nail on the head. That's what I was looking for. Okay, so what could dust and dirt tell us about it? How could it help an investigation? It can tell us where the person has traveled. Okay, so very good. That's the answer to your question. How could dust or dirt be used in an investigation? It can tell us where a person has traveled. So make sure you write that down.
Because I literally looked at the first like bar. I'm like, wait a minute, we haven't seen. There's no other thing up there except for where a person has traveled.
Exactly. So very good. Miss Martin, I'm sorry I overlooked you. You as well hit the nail on the head where they traveled. So that's my bad. Very good. Okay, next note. The three main types of fingerprints are arches, loops, and whorls. And I spelled arches wrong. Sorry. There you go. There's the right spelling. All right. While you're writing that down, I'm going to go ahead and define what AFIS stands for. It's the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. Okay, so there's your notes for that. All right, so make sure you have your note for dust and dirt and fingerprints. I'm going to go ahead and move on, but y'all make sure to write that down and actively listen while I go ahead and start talking about the next subject. All right, so from week 1, okay, I taught y'all about crime scene basics, and we identified the three main types of evidence that are physical, trace, and testimonial. Okay, but in my opinion, and this is solely just my opinion, I think that this evidence, impression evidence, could be a whole category in itself. But for, time's sake and for the sake of confusing y'all, I'm going to still categorize it under the branch of physical evidence, okay? But it's a very unique form of evidence. So the first thing we're looking at here are shoe prints and tire tracks. And obviously, some surfaces don't take on these impressions, like the roads, okay, the asphalt paved roads. Those don't really take those tracks very well unless there's paint or something else in the road. But on dirt roads and muddy areas, that's a different story. So if the ground is soft, okay, it will take on the actual impression of your shoe print or the tire tracks that, of the vehicle you're driving. And if they're good enough quality, they can simply just be photographed and we can tell all the details that we want to just by the photograph. Okay. Somebody said earlier that their shoe print, okay, it was like when I asked what can dust and dirt reveal, they said their shoe print. Okay, so in a sense, yes, it can. And in that instance, if we have a shoe print that's just a little bit of dust or a little bit of dirt, well, then for that circumstance, we would want to photograph it, but then we would try to lift it off the ground with tape. Okay, we would try to use a specific type of tape, put it over that whole entire shoe print, and then lift the whole thing. And all that dust and dirt would stick to the glue.
And sometimes with the tire print, you can tell what kind of car it was.
You sure can. You sure can. So other times, in order to preserve the evidence, okay, so we're actually going to make a plaster casting of it. So we're going to build a little frame around a specific area, and we're going to pour dental paste in there, okay, or some kind of plaster of Paris, something like that, that will harden. And once it does, it will actually take on the shape of the impression that it was poured in. So once that hardens, you can remove it. And once you do that, you have the surface that's revealed, okay, that will look just like the tire tracks, or it will look like the shoe print. And the reason for that is because it is on a dirt road, or it is in an area that sees a lot of high traffic. So if another car came through and ran through the same tire track, well, then there goes sample 1. Okay, it's going to take on a completely different shape now that another car has gone through it than like the picture you see there on the screen. Another reason, the weather. Okay, if a good rain comes, then it's going to wipe away all of the tire tracks and all the impressions left behind on that dirt road. So it's kind of timely. So that's the important thing. We want to try to collect that evidence before it disappears, because if you don't have evidence, then you don't have a case. All right. So just like Raiden said, once we look at this evidence, sometimes we can identify specific things about it. We can identify a specific type of shoe because sometimes the name of the shoe is on the bottom, or there's a very unique pattern that's just specific to that one shoe brand. So an example of that would be like Converse. Okay, all the bottoms of those shoes are the same. And sometimes even actually the size of your shoe is on the bottom of the shoe. So all very good forms of information that we can use to further our investigation. It can tell us the type of tire, okay? Car tire, truck tire. Is it a mud riding tire? What is it? Okay, we can tell clues like that from those things as well. And probably something that you haven't thought about, okay? Because first of all, y'all aren't driving, okay? So maybe more specifically towards the shoes. But as quick as y'all are growing, you probably go through your shoes before they actually get a chance to get wore down. Okay, but the longer you wear those shoes, the longer you drive the tires, you're just going to eventually get wear and tear on them. And that's going to be very important when it comes to these impressions, okay? Because the little specific scratches and cuts and nicks and chips and things like that that occur just from the wear and tear are going to leave behind very individual characteristics that can be used to match suspect to crime scene or vehicle to crime scene. So that's what we're trying to find. Okay.
And sometimes, if you have a shoe that's torn up, pieces like stuff might fall off the shoe. That gives the people who's arrested in the crime more evidence.
Yes, it sure does. Okay. The more evidence we have, the better. The more it's going to help us in solving this case. Okay. So your shoes specifically. Typically, you're the only person to wear your shoes. All right. So the shoes take on, in a sense, the form of your feet, okay, and your walking style. So some people walk on their toes. So those people's shoes are going to be more wore on the front part of their shoe than on the back. Whereas vice versa, some people plant their heels when they walk, okay? So they're going to get more wear and tear on the back of their shoes than they would on the front. Some people are flat footed, okay? So all these things over time will reveal themselves as the shoes become wore down. Think about your tennis shoes, okay? You wear them out to PE, you go on the asphalt, you go on the paved areas, okay? You run around and play. Well, eventually that rubber's just going to smooth out, okay? And that's going to be very unique and specific to your shoe and you alone. So, and it all has to do with how you walk. Okay, and the other two types of impressions that we're going to talk about. Okay, bite marks, taking you back to your childhood. Okay, each human has 32 teeth. Okay, and right now y'all probably only have about 28, unless you're missing some of your baby teeth still. But don't worry, they'll come on in. And when you get older, okay, you'll get 4 more teeth in the very back, and those are your wisdom teeth. And some people don't get them. Okay, my grandpa, he never got his wisdom teeth, but a lot of people do. Okay, so I got mine in the 10th grade, and I didn't even feel them coming in or anything. I went to the dentist, and they took the X-ray, and they said, "Oh, your wisdom teeth are getting ready to come in. We're going to go ahead and put you down for an extraction." So sure enough, about a month or two later, I was back at the dentist and they removed my wisdom teeth. So
And sometimes that's a shoe thing. They'll probably like after like the crime scene. Sometimes they might like buy new shoes so they don't get caught and get investigated and get interrogated.
yes, okay. So there's many reasons why somebody could bite another person, or okay, as it says here, bite marks left on a victim, an assailant, or other objects at the crime scene can often be matched to dental records. Okay, so if you've ever been to the dentist, then your dental records are out there. Okay, so And a lot of the times whenever we find the skeleton, okay, skeletal remains, that's one of the first things that are done is we try to see if that the dental records match that person's teeth, okay? And it's a lot of the times it does come through because, you know, in these modern times that we live in, typically most of us all go to the dentist at some point, okay? Hopefully you go a little more often than not going at all, but
But most of them maybe like try to hack into the dentist thing and like delete the dentist records because they know they bit them, whoever they might have killed or something, and they might try to hack the dentist records and delete those.
well, they could. That'd be a lot of inside jobs, but anything in this scenario is possible.
Can a bite mark show if they have fake teeth?
Yes, okay. It would take on the marks of the false teeth as well. And that would actually be a little more difficult to determine because a lot of the times false teeth are kind of the same set, okay? It's just kind of stylized to fit into your mouth, or you try to choose teeth that look very similar to the teeth that you used to have. Okay? So, I mean, in that circumstance, we're talking about older people. Okay? Because most old people, you know, over time, they just due to age and wear and tear of your chompers, you lose them, they get weak, they break off, they hurt, okay, whatever. And a lot of times older people have false teeth. Okay, so think about it. If you were the victim of a situation and somebody had come up behind you and had you around the neck, okay, you didn't have a weapon, and I mean you're scratching, you're clawing, you're trying to get out of that situation, and then you decide to bite that person on the arm. Well, you take a good chunk out, okay? So you bite them hard, they let you go, and then they scurry off. Well, say that 2 weeks later, from your witness report and your facial composite that you and the forensic artist came up with, they find the suspect that you're looking for. Well, if they bring that person in and they've got that bite mark on their arm, well, that's automatically going to be a red flag. But they're going to take it a step further and prove that that was actually a bite mark that you, the victim, had left on that person, the suspect. So they're actually going to confirm from your dental records the fact that that suspect had to have been at the crime scene and that you were the one that had to have bitten them.
How can they tell if it's like if they have braces on?
I'm not sure if that would really show up. If the braces were there, I don't think that they would really interfere because typically the braces are on like the outsides of your teeth. So the main thing they look for is the impressions that the bottom of your teeth make. So the sharp parts.
I'm talking about when you bite them, but they still don't go. Like you bite deeper, and then your braces like touches the skin.
Well, hey, in that moment, I don't think you're really worried about that. You're not worried about hurting that person. You're worried about trying to get out of that situation.
Yeah.
Bite them as hard as you have to get out of it.
Yep.
Okay. So, last thing about impressions, okay, tool marks. They also have very unique shapes. Think about it. The longer you use a tool, the more wear and tear it gets. Okay, so that tool eventually becomes very unique in its own way. So the same thing, those little nicks and chips and the edges of that tool can be used to match suspect to crime scene, suspect to victim, vice versa. And obviously, you know, tools can also pick up traces of blood and other types of DNA evidence. Somebody typed in the chat, oh, about the fake teeth. Okay, can it show if someone has fake teeth? The mark would still be there, yes, but I think it would be pretty easy to determine that those were false teeth. Okay. Now we're going to talk about fracture matches. Okay. Sorry. I need to give you your note for this slide, don't I? All right. So what I want you to know about impressions, I'm going to say, give me 3 examples of impression evidence. And I'm going to change the slide before you get a chance to write them down. See if you know that. Okay, so think about it. Somebody
Shoe
come
prints,
through.
shoe prints, bite prints, shoe prints, tire prints, and bite marks.
Okay, well, hey, Raiden just gave you all three. Those are the same three that I would have chosen. Okay, so tire tracks, shoe prints, bite marks. Okay, can you see them now? Tamaya, you good? All right, good deal. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about fracture matches. Okay, so think about it. When an object is broken, torn, or cut, two unique edges are formed. And those edges are referred to as the fracture lines. Okay, so here's the example that I gave first period. Here I have this piece of paper. I have this other piece to it. Okay, now you can tell right off the bat that this belongs to this piece of paper because how the letters line up. Okay, but overlook the letters. Look at simply the edges of the paper. I mean, that couldn't go anywhere else, right? So it's a match.
But sometimes the person that did the crime might try to, if they did that, like made fractures, they might try to hide it somewhere.
Well, sure. They obviously they're trying to get away with the crime, so yeah, they're going to try to do whatever they can to make it more difficult. You're absolutely right. Okay, so when we compare those edges, okay, just like with this example, you can tell that with your naked eye that belongs to that piece of paper. Okay, but sometimes it's a little more difficult. But ultimately, it's going to indicate that those two things were one solid piece at one time. And just like here with this sample, okay, here we have a broken reflector from a bicycle. Okay, all those pieces scattered out like a puzzle. Okay, we can tell right off the bat that the surface characteristics are the same and the color is the same, but we have to actually maneuver those pieces around and put them back into place. Okay, and when we do that, we still see those fracture lines. Okay, and with this example, there's one little tiny piece still missing. So say that we figure out what the suspect was driving that night, okay, the vehicle that struck the pedestrian, we're going to go and do a thorough investigation on that vehicle. Well, if we find that one little tiny triangular piece in the bumper of that car still, well, then it's going to be very hard for the suspect to try and downplay that, okay? Because the chances of that happening they're just not there. Okay, it's definitely going to be a major turnaround in that case. All right, so what do I want you to know about fracture matches? So tell me, what are fracture lines?
Fraction lines are the things that when something breaks, they'll have fraction lines that connect all the pieces together.
Okay, I'm going to take it just a step further. I'm going to take it just a step further than what Raiden did. So the unique edges that are formed when an object is broken or torn or cut, okay? So it's just those unique edges, okay? And just like the pieces of a puzzle, they should come together perfectly. All right. So somebody tell us, what's a type of evidence that we could use to identify fracture matches? So just think about it. What's the type of evidence that we could look at the fracture lines of? What's something that we could examine the fracture lines of?
You can examine the fracture lines of the piece that got broken.
Okay, a piece that got broken. So for this example, we have a reflector. Okay, there's a knife. Okay, the tip was broken off. You could use a broken headlight. There's all kind of things that we could use to identify. Maybe not so much the skeletal remains there, But a vase, yeah, you most definitely could use a vase. Okay, so good point. Thank you for your input. Okay, so wounds. Okay, wounds can often be matched to a specific weapon or a tool based off of the marks of that weapon. Okay, so think about it. A gunshot, it leaves a very specific type of wound, right? Same thing with a knife. And the clues that those things tell us are the weapon size, the weapon shape, the weapon's length, what kind of weapon was used. And sometimes it's easier to determine that than others, but there's still going to be a wound left that we can examine. And the analysis of those wounds provide clues, okay? They can provide clues about a victim's injuries. They can also tell us clues about the suspect, like their handedness, okay? So are they left-handed? Are they right-handed? It can tell us their height. It can tell us even the positions of the victim and the suspect at the time of the incident. Okay, so question I'm going to pose for you. What information can be gathered from a wound? Okay, somebody take it on. Okay, very good. The size of what?
The size of the wound.
Not the wound, the
bullet inside of it.
So the weapon, okay? Very good. Okay, so we got size and shape. Okay, so y'all are good. Y'all got it. Very nice. Okay, questioned documents. Okay, so this is another very specific type of situation that we're dealing with. Okay, but it happens. Okay, so people make forgeries of documents. They try to commit fraud. People write ransom notes, suicide notes. Okay, all that kind of thing. So sometimes we have to actually examine documents that are found at crime scenes as well. So just like any other form of evidence, we're going to analyze it to try to find those things that make it unique and specific. Try to link it to a specific person.
And like maybe like if the person before they did suicide, they put the documents in there, but then they hide them. But if the person if a person like has the documents before like the person who got killed like let's document because they might know someone's gonna go kill him or something. And if the killer finds the document, he's gonna try to hide them or take them with him.
Absolutely. Hey, it can happen. Okay. So what we do when we find these documents is we try to find those unique characteristics. Okay. So what kind of paper, excuse me, what kind of paper was used? Okay. What was the printing method of that document? Was it typed up on an old school typewriter? Was it just simply printed off the computer? Was it a handwritten note? Okay, so handwriting, something that's very unique and specific to each individual. I write in cursive, okay, and that's because since the third grade, when they taught us how to write in cursive, that's how I write. Okay, so my cursive is actually better than my print, whereas y'all, a lot of y'all don't even write in cursive, can't even read the cursive. And that's not your fault. It's because that wasn't part of y'all's educational curriculum like it was mine whenever I was in school. So that's not, but still, your handwriting is unique to you. Some of us write better than others. Some of us do our letters specific ways. It's just things that make us unique, okay, and individual. And sometimes these documents have things like watermarks in them, okay, not somebody spilling their drink, okay, it's little hidden figures and words and lines inside of the document. So an example of that would be money. Okay, if you've ever paid with a $20 bill at the grocery store, the gas station, and they took it and they held it up like this and they were looking at it with the light, okay, what they're trying to do is determine if your bill is real or counterfeit, okay, real or fake. So in our money, there are little figures of our presidents and words and things that are hidden in them to let people know if the bill is actually real or if it's counterfeit.
And sometimes someone might send a fake thing, but like put the same address where the bill is, and then like they might tell them to go somewhere, but then they end up going to the person who wanted to go there, and they might get killed.
They could. You're right. They could definitely get killed. All right. So I'm getting ready to type, but I want you to know about documents. All right. Posing another question. Okay. Think about it. What could an investigator use to match a ransom note to a suspect? So what's something that we could use to match this document to the suspect?
They might put their name and put other stuff about themselves.
Okay, they could. I mean, if they said sincerely Joe Smith, okay, well that'd be kind of silly, but I'm sure it's been done before. Okay, y'all said fingerprints. Now we're not really looking at it for fingerprints just yet, but if their fingerprints were there, then yes, most definitely they would dust that document, try to find that person's fingerprint on it as well. Okay, so y'all are actually thinking ahead a little bit, which is a good thing. And that's what I was looking for. Okay, their handwriting. Okay, that could be something that would most definitely tie it to a specific suspect. All right, and then your last slide of the day. Okay, insects. So remember back to week 1, whenever I told you that sometimes specific crimes call for specific forensics investigators with fields of expertise. Well, one of those people were the forensic entomologists. And remember, those are the people that study the life cycles of bugs and insects, okay? So flies and beetles and other insects can provide useful clues about a corpse. Okay, a corpse is a dead body. So these entomologists, they use these clues. Okay, so factors like the weather conditions, the location, the condition of the body, and their knowledge of the life cycles of these insects to help them determine PMI. Okay, and PMI, one sec, PMI stands for post-mortem interval. And post-mortem interval is the time between death and the discovery of the body. So in other words, how much time has passed from that person dying to the discovery of their body. Okay, I'll pause for your question.
2 minutes, man. No, they love it.
And sometimes
Go ahead.
and sometimes maggots might be there. If maggots might be on the body, like maggots might be there.
No, you are right. Okay, because what are maggots?
They're some kind of insect.
They are, okay, but they're the baby of something. So maggots are actually little baby larvae. So what do maggots turn into? Do y'all know?
Flies.
Very good. Okay, so in this circumstance, okay, with the fly, what they're going to do is they're attracted to that dead, rotting smell. Okay, it's kind of nasty to think of, but they are decomposers. That's one of their main things to do. So what they do is they're attracted into that smell. Okay, think about it when you see roadkill on the side of the road or in the woods or whatever. So they are attracted to that source, and they're actually going to go to that source and lay their eggs.
And for some reason, like when I was on the phone with my family, we went by dead rotten fish. I'm like, I'm really so weird. I really like the smell of dead rotten fish. I'm like, what the heck is wrong with me?
Yeah, it's repulsive to us, but they love it. Okay, so it smells like fried chicken to them. So whenever they lay their eggs in that corpse, the maggots, whenever they hatch, okay, they come out. they actually eat that. Okay, they're actually the ones that are feasting on that flesh. So if we know there are maggots there, then we can determine how many days have passed since likely that person's death occurred. Okay, so first question: what insects are helpful in a murder investigation?
Flies.
Flies and
very good.
maggot.
Flies, maggots, beetles, and even some other insects. But as long as you know flies and beetles, you're good. All right. Then I also want you to tell me, what does PMI stand for?
The time between death and the discovery of the body.
Okay, very good. PMI stands for the post-mortem interval, which, as Raiden just said, is the time between death and the discovery of the body. So very good. Thank y'all for your input. I really do appreciate that. I can't stand whenever I ask questions and it's just silence. Okay, it's not as bad here in the classroom. Okay, but whenever y'all are at home, it sucks. It's not fun. Just sitting here. Hello, hello. Are y'all alive out there? So thank you for your input. I really do appreciate it. If y'all were here at school, I'd come around with some candy. Okay, and the last thing, DNA.
I can't have candy because I have braces on.
Oh my goodness. Well, hey, maybe by the time you come back to school, you'll have them off, and I'll be able to hook you up.
No, I'm gonna have to keep them for 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I had mine for 2 or 3.
Well, y'all bear through it. You'll appreciate it in the long run. Okay.
Oh yeah, it's all worth it.
You can might give me soft candy or something.
Well, I'll see what I can do.
I was about to
Y'all
say,
come
I thought
back.
if you had
I'll have some
braces-
stuff here for us.
I was about to say, I thought if you had braces, you can't have hard candy.
No, you can't. Or
You can't have gum, hard candy, or
Yeah.
really any kind of candy you can.
Yeah, you can have it because I got braces too. So like, yeah.
All right, my goodness. So we got some people out there that most definitely have their dental records on file.
And I think there's only one candy at my house. I think those are really soft, so I think that's like about the only candy you can have when you have braces.
Okay.
Not
All
really.
right, y'all, let me get finished with this, and we can open up the floor for discussions. Definitely don't mind us chatting and talking, but since I'm recording this lesson, let me get finished with what I got to do, and I'll stop the video, and we can talk about that. Okay, so last thing, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and DNA is something that's very unique and specific to you. Okay, so even if you have a twin, they have different. You have a lot of the same DNA, okay, but there are going to be differences. And same thing from your parents and grandparents and cousins. Y'all will share some DNA, but it will not be an identical match by no means. Okay, so DNA can be taken from nearly every part of your body. Your skin, your tissues, your hair, your fingernails, your bones, your teeth, and any bodily fluids all contain DNA.
Can you get it from like your skull? Can you get DNA from your skull too?
You sure could. Okay, your skull is actually a bone. Okay, a very hard bone. So yes, it would reveal DNA. It sure would. Your blood, all that kind of stuff. So DNA is then used to create a profile that can be compared to the profiles from other suspects or victims. Okay, so in other words, we have this DNA sample, okay, and we're trying to match it to a specific person. So one of the first things they do is they run it through yet another database system, and this one's called CODIS, okay, and that's the Combined DNA Index System. And that database is maintained by the FBI. So they are constantly adding to it, okay? Every time somebody gets arrested, they are, one of the first things they do after booking is they actually collect their fingerprint samples. So say that you had never been arrested before, okay? But you had a little crime spree in your 20s, okay, whatever. So say that you robbed a gas station or something in your mid 20s, and you got away with it, okay? But you left behind the weapon that you were trying to use. Okay, so say you never got arrested, 25 years down the road, you're 50 years old and you get pulled over for a DUI. Okay, so they're going to arrest you, take you downtown, book you, then they're going to collect your fingerprint sample. Okay, so once they have that, they run it through CODIS. And lo and behold, there's going to be a match from that fingerprint sample that was submitted 25 years ago to the fingerprint sample that was just recently submitted. And now not only are you serving time for a DUI, you're also now going to be charged with that robbery, okay, that you took place in 25 years ago. Okay, so your fingerprints remain in that system, and sorry, I'm talking about fingerprints. It's DNA, okay, not fingerprints, DNA. So your DNA will stay in that system. Sorry, I got caught off track with the fingerprint and the DNA, but the CODIS is the DNA index system, okay? It's a database maintained by the FBI, and it helps us link DNA samples from crimes to specific victims or specific suspects.
Lydell Williams said, "What if the police lost everyone's record?"
That wouldn't happen. If all the records were lost, then that would be devastating, okay? But I just don't foresee that happening. I don't see how it could. They've been doing this since the 20s, okay, the 1920s. So talking about over 100 years worth of fingerprint samples and things like that have been added to it and constantly, updated. But say for whatever reason they did lose it, okay, some kind of crazy internet crash or whatever, that would be extremely devastating, okay? And a lot of people would probably get away with stuff, and some people would never get caught for the crimes that they committed. So that's just, I think I said fingerprints again, didn't I? I'm talking about DNA, sorry. So here in recent years, okay, something that y'all probably noticed as well as me is that things like Ancestry DNA and that 23andMe have gotten real popular. And I think those are cool things, okay? Me and my sister, we did 23andMe, and we had to get the little tube, okay, and we had to spit in it. So we had to actually submit some of our saliva. That's what they use to test our DNA and to determine what all our ethnicity is. So percentage of this, percentages of that, okay, whatever, that make us who we are. So, but whenever we do that, I mean, I knew what was going to happen, okay, but I think a lot of people out there don't really realize that once they submit their DNA to these Ancestry and 23andMe things, that the FBI is involved with that too, okay? And once you submit your DNA, well, they're going to go ahead and run it through CODIS just for the heck of it to make sure that you're not in any way associated to some of these crime scenes or some of these unknown samples that we have on file. And if you don't believe me, it was just proven recently that that is the case. Okay, so the Golden State Killer, which was a important serial killer that took place in like the 60s, and many people were murdered. Okay, but for the past 60 years or 55 years, those cases were all unsolved, so they went cold for over 50 years. Okay, but they had DNA from the person that did the killing, and they just were never able to make a match to it. Well, up until recently, whenever one of the family members of that serial killer submitted their DNA into Ancestry DNA, and red flags started going off, okay, so they knew that that person who submitted their DNA wasn't the serial killer, but they knew that they were related to them, okay, because they had specific matches in their DNA profile. It wasn't an exact match, but enough to link it to a relative. So what they did was they went and questioned that person and made them give over a list of all their living relatives. So what the FBI started to do then was stake out those people's houses, okay? Kind of keep an eye out, and whenever they took their trash out, people would actually go through their trash and try to find samples of their DNA. Okay, so they did, and they actually found the man that they were looking for. Okay, a complete match. So the serial killer was then charged and arrested for those murders that took place well over 60 years ago. And he was an old man. I mean, probably in his 80s. Okay, so he got to live the past 50 years a free man, but now he's behind bars, and all that came to the surface because of the Ancestry DNA and the combined DNA index system. All right, so I'll pause if anybody wants to chime in with questions or comments while I type in the last notes that I want you to have today.
Like, what will happen if like what will happen if like all the corpse was like just skeletons? Will that mess up everything, or?
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
Like, what if there's like just skeletons and remains, like just bones and stuff? Would that like make it harder for them to find out who it was, or?
I'm trying to understand what you're asking. So with the skeleton, we can still get DNA from it. Yes, we can get that from the bones or from the teeth. So
Okay.
we could take that person's DNA and put it into this system and see if we can try to figure out who that skeleton belongs to. Okay, who that person was.
But what if
We
the
can
teeth?
also, or the teeth, yes.
I'm saying, what if the teeth were knocked out? Then how are they supposed to get DNA from the bones?
Well, you can get it from the bones then, okay? But if the teeth are missing, it's just going to be a little more difficult because then we couldn't make the dental record match. All we would have to go off of then was simply the DNA.
Okay.
All right, so your last note for today, I want you to, okay, just know that DNA can nearly be extracted from any part of your body. And I want you to tell me what CODIS stands for. That's the Combined DNA Index System. Okay, so nothing crazy, not a whole lot of notes today. Okay, y'all shouldn't be signing off yet. I haven't ended class, but we're going to watch one little short video, and then I will let y'all go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.